I've carried this memory for more than half a century, and even now it comes back in fragments. Quiet, unhurried, like winter fog rolling over the Newfoundland hills. Back in 1968, when I was still too young to understand the weight adults carried, I used to stop by a small harbor bar after school. I wasn't old enough to drink, of course, but the owner didn't mind me sitting by the window with a soda while I waited for the evening bus. It was a simple routine, the kind of pattern a young mind accepts without question. What I didn't know then was that one man sitting at the far end of the counter would pull me into the strangest memory of my life, one that would make sense only decades later. He was always there before me, always in the same seat. A man in his late 30s with tired eyes and a quiet sadness that never left his face. His coat was worn, his hands unsteady, and he spoke softly, as if every word had to cross a great distance before reaching his mouth. Most evenings he nursed the same drink for hours, staring at nothing in particular. People whispered that he had troubles, but in small towns, everyone has troubles. I didn't think much of it at first. What caught my attention were the things he muttered when he thought no one was listening. Strange phrases, odd complaints. Words that meant nothing to the Newfoundland of 1968, yet sounded like they should mean something. He spoke of reaching friends overseas in seconds, of tiny glowing screens, of voices carried through the air. At the time, I chalked it up to the drink, or to a mind drifting between memory and imagination. But there was something else, something in the way he spoke, with the quiet certainty of someone remembering, not inventing. And sometimes, just for a moment, the sadness in his eyes looked like homesickness, but not for any place I could recognize. It was as if he longed for a world I wasn't old enough to picture. On the night that changed everything, he turned to me for the first time, his voice steady in a way I'd never heard. He said he didn't belong here, not in this bar, not in this town, not even in this year. And before he walked out into the cold fog, he left me a torn scrap of paper with a single impossible number on it, a number that wouldn't make sense until the world finally caught up. I was 15 in the summer of 1968, old enough to notice the quiet details of people but too young to understand what they meant. Newfoundland still felt wide and slow back then, a place of long evenings, wooden storefronts, and the sound of gulls cutting through cold air drifting in from the harbor. My father worked shifts at the mill, my mother kept the house, and I wandered the town with that restless aimlessness every teenager knows. That little harbor bar became my waiting room, a warm pocket of light between school and home. I used to sit by the window, watching the fishing boats return through drifting mist while the bartender wiped the same counter for the 100th time. The man I would come to remember for the rest of my life always arrived before me. He never ordered anything strong, just a single drink he let melt into itself. He looked too young to be so tired, yet too old to be called anything but worn down. His clothes weren't strange, but something about him was. Not his appearance, his presence. He seemed like someone who had nowhere to go, yet was always trying to get there. The first time he spoke to me, it wasn't even a conversation. A radio behind the bar had crackled with some news about advances in long-distance communication, and I remember hearing him mutter, "That's nothing compared to what's coming." At 15, I didn't think much of it. Grown men said odd things all the time. Still, I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye. He never looked drunk, but he looked overwhelmed, as if he carried memories that didn't belong in our small town, or in the year we were living. Weeks passed like that. Simple, quiet, uneventful. But beneath the routine, something was shifting, slowly, steadily, until the night he finally spoke to me with clear eyes and a steady voice, and everything I thought I understood about time began to tilt. If you're enjoying the story so far and would like to hear more quiet, mysterious moments like this one, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot, and I'd be grateful to have you here as each new chapter unfolds. I remember the smell of that bar more clearly than I remember most things from my teenage years. Old wood, sea salt drifting in with every customer, and the faint sweetness of spilled soda drying on the counter. It was the kind of place that didn't change much from week to week, maybe not even from year to year. The lights hummed softly, and the same 3 songs rotated on the jukebox until they felt like part of the walls. The summer evenings outside were long and pale, but inside everything stayed dim and steady. That sameness is probably why I noticed him so quickly. He didn't fit the rhythm of the place. Most grown men in Corner Brook carried themselves with a kind of rough certainty. Fishermen, mill workers, mechanics, men who knew their place in the world even when life beat them down. But he wasn't like that. He sat as if he were waiting for news that never arrived, his shoulders held in a tight, worried shape. His drink barely moved. Sometimes he'd hold it without sipping, staring into the amber as if it could answer something for him. Other times, he'd rest his hands flat on the table, eyes following some point far beyond the window, past the harbor, past the hills. A man looking into another life entirely. One evening, after school had let out early for a teacher meeting, I arrived at the bar while the sun was still high. He was already there. The bartender nodded toward me in that silent way adults acknowledge kids they're used to seeing but don't quite understand. I sat in my usual booth. The man turned slightly, just enough for me to notice he recognized the routine too. Something in that small acknowledgement made me braver than I had any right to be at 15. "You're here early," he said, voice steady but quiet. It startled me. Not because he spoke, but because he sounded almost normal, almost present. Not like the drifting version of himself I had grown used to seeing. "School let out," I answered. "You're early too." He gave a faint smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Couldn't sleep last night." I didn't know what to say, so I sipped my soda and pretended to read the posters on the wall. But he continued, almost talking to himself. "It gets harder when the world slows down." I frowned. "When it slows down?" He nodded, taking a breath like he was weighing whether to keep going. "This place, this time, everything moves differently, feels tighter, harder to breathe some days." I didn't understand, not in the way an adult might, but something about what he said lodged in me, like a small seed I wouldn't recognize until much later. He wasn't talking about stress or work or a failing marriage, the usual adult troubles. He meant something else entirely. Outside, a gull screamed over the harbor. Inside, he let out a soft, tired chuckle. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." I didn't know what he meant then. I didn't know that this was the first thread of a truth I'd only unravel decades later. But I remember the way he said it, like someone remembering a place he could no longer. For a long moment, he didn't say anything else. He just let the weight of his unfinished sentence settle between us like a fog that had drifted in from the harbor. I remember thinking he must have been one of those men who carried too much on their mind. Work, money, family. Adult problems I couldn't name back then. But there was no ring on his finger, no trace of paint, grease, or salt on his hands. He didn't look like a mill worker or a fisherman. He looked like someone who had been dropped into town without warning. Eventually, he leaned back against the booth and rubbed his eyes with his fingers, like he was tired of his own thoughts. "Sometimes I forget what year it is," he said, almost laughing at himself. I thought it was a joke. "Well, it's 1968, I answered, trying to be helpful. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just nodded, like he knew the date but couldn't feel it. "Yeah," he murmured, staring at the table. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." The way he said it unsettled me in a way I couldn't name at 15. Adults didn't talk like that. Not the ones I knew anyway. They complained about bills or long work days, not about forgetting the year they lived in. I wondered then if maybe he had come from St. John's or some other bigger place, somewhere that moved faster than our town did. Maybe his life had fallen apart. Maybe he drank to quiet something painful. But the more I watched him, the more I saw that his sadness wasn't the kind born from mistakes. It was the sadness of someone displaced, like a man standing in a room where all the furniture had been rearranged overnight. He spoke again, softer this time. "Do you ever get the feeling you're not supposed to be where you are?" I hesitated. "Sometimes. I guess everyone does." "Not like that," he said quickly, almost cutting me off. "I mean, not supposed to be here. Not supposed to be now." His eyes lifted toward me, and for the first time, they didn't look distant. They looked frightened, just for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. Outside, a truck rumbled past the bar, headlights sweeping through the window. The man flinched slightly, as if startled by something familiar rather than loud. I noticed then that he always watched moving lights with a strange intensity. Cars, boats, even the flicker of a match. Like they reminded him of something, or someone. "What do you mean, not supposed to be now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the words fighting for a place in his throat, but something held them back. Fear, maybe, or the certainty that I wouldn't believe him. Finally, he shook his head and sighed. "You're too young to understand," he said. "But when you're older, maybe you'll look back and see what I meant." I didn't know then that this was the start of a truth that would follow me into the rest of my life. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about him more than I meant to. Not in a worried way, more in a curious, unsettled way, like when you hear a strange sound at night and spend the whole next morning replaying it in your mind. I tried to brush off what he'd said. Adults rambled, adults drank, adults carried storms I couldn't see, but something about his words clung to me. It wasn't the content. It was the certainty in his voice, as if he wasn't describing confusion, but remembering an inconvenient truth. When I walked into the bar again that week, he was in the same seat as always, but something about him seemed different, more alert, more present, as if he'd spent the day trying to convince himself of something and had failed. He glanced at me the moment I entered, then quickly looked away, as though he hadn't meant to. I took my usual spot by the window, pretending I hadn't noticed. A few minutes later, he stood up and walked toward me. The sound of his shoes on the wooden floor felt louder than it should have, like each step carried a weight he wasn't ready to hold. He stopped beside my table and cleared his throat. "Mind if I sit?" It caught me off guard. He'd never sat with me before. I just nodded. He lowered himself into the seat across from mine, hands folded, eyes restless. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, "You ever think about the future?" It was an odd question for a grown man to ask a boy. I shrugged. "Sometimes. I guess I wonder what I'll do, where I'll go." He studied my face as if searching for the shape of a world he already knew. "And what do you think it'll be like?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Probably like this, just newer." He exhaled, almost laughing, but not quite. "Newer," he repeated. "You have no idea." There was no bitterness in his voice, only an ache, a longing for something that didn't belong in that wooden bar, with its humming lights and faint smell of salt water. "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked toward the window, where the harbor fog was sliding in again, soft and pale. "The future, it keeps moving, faster than you think, faster than you can hold on to. One day you look around, and everything familiar is gone." I thought he meant aging, or change, or some adult sorrow I hadn't yet earned the right to understand. But something in the way he spoke, slow, measured, like he was remembering, not predicting, made my chest tighten. "Where are you from?" I finally asked. He blinked, and for the briefest second his expression shifted. Fear, recognition, resignation, all tangled together. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. "What matters is, I'm not from here." He didn't mean Newfoundland. He didn't mean the town. He meant something far bigger, something I wasn't old enough to grasp. Not yet. I spent the next day thinking about what he'd said, replaying it in my head during class, during lunch, even on the walk home. I'm not from here. Most people would have brushed it off as drunken nonsense, but something about his tone, steady, resigned, made it hard to dismiss. He hadn't been rambling. He hadn't been joking. He sounded like someone confessing a truth he'd held too long. That evening, the air outside was sharp and cold, unusual for late summer. Fog rolled in early, thickening around the street lamps until the town felt smaller, quieter, like the world had shrunk to a handful of glowing circles in the mist. I pushed open the bar door, expecting to see him in his usual seat. Part of me hoped he wouldn't be there. Part of me hoped he would. He was. This time, he didn't pretend not to notice me. His eyes lifted the moment I walked in, and for a second, I saw something like relief, not joy, something gentler and sadder, like he'd been waiting for a familiar face in a room full of strangers. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said as I slid into my seat. "I always come here," I replied. "Bus takes a while." He gave a small nod. "Routine, that's good. Routines keep you grounded." To anyone else, it would have sounded like ordinary advice, but the way he said grounded made it feel heavier, as if he meant tethered to a time, an era. I watched him rotate the glass in his hands, the ice melting into thin lines of water. "You said yesterday you're not from here," I said quietly, unsure if I was crossing some invisible boundary. He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. The bar was nearly empty, just a couple of old regulars murmuring about weather and fishing conditions. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice to barely more than a breath. "I didn't choose to be here," he said, "and I don't know how to get back." He didn't say back home. He didn't say back where I came from. He said back as if he meant a direction on a map no one in 1968 could understand. I felt a chill that didn't come from the fog. "How far did you come from?" I asked. He hesitated, eyes drifting toward the window where the night had settled fully, pressing against the glass like something alive. "Far," he finally answered. "Farther than this town could imagine." His fingers tightened around the glass. "You ever feel like you're waking up in someone else's life?" he asked. "Like you remember things you shouldn't and forget things you're supposed to hold on to?" I nodded slowly, even though I didn't really understand. I think he could tell. "For me," he whispered, "it's every day." He looked so tired then, not physically, but in a way that made him seem decades older than he was, as if the world itself had worn him thin. And for the first time, I wondered whether he truly meant what he said, or whether some part of me already believed him. He didn't speak for a long while after that. He just stared at his hands, as if trying to remember what they were supposed to be holding. The jukebox hummed softly in the corner, playing a song that had been around for decades already, a tune so familiar it felt like part of the air. But he looked at it with a strange sort of distance, like someone listening to an echo from a place they had only visited in dreams. "Do you know what the hardest part is?" he asked suddenly. I shook my head. "It isn't the place, it's the pace. Everything here moves slower than it should, like time's dragging its feet." He let out a shaky breath, rubbing his thumb along the rim of the glass. "Every sound, every decision, every day, it's all thick." I didn't understand exactly what he meant, but the way he spoke made something inside me go still. He wasn't talking about being bored. He wasn't talking about Newfoundland's quiet nights. He was talking about something deeper, something wrong. "Did something happen to you?" I asked. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine with a sharpness I hadn't seen before. "Something always happens," he said softly. "But that's not the problem. The problem is what comes after." He paused, searching for words that could fit inside a 15-year-old's understanding. "You grow up thinking the world changes slowly," he continued. "But that's not true. Time reshapes everything faster than you can keep up with, faster than you can accept." He looked down. "And when you lose your place in that flow, when you fall out of it, coming back isn't so simple." The door swung open then, letting in a burst of cold fog that curled around the wooden floor before fading into the dim light. He shivered, even though the air inside was warm. "You said you didn't choose to be here," I said quietly. "So where were you supposed to be?" His breath trembled. "Somewhere ahead," he whispered. "Years ahead. A place where everything is brighter, faster, louder. A place where you're never really alone, even when you want to be." I didn't know what to say. His voice wasn't wild or unstable. It was calm, steady, almost mournful. He spoke like someone mourning a life they could still remember in perfect detail, but could never return to. "Is that why you drink?" I finally asked. He closed his eyes. "I drink to forget enough to sleep," he said, "but it never lasts. When morning comes, I remember everything again. Not just the faces or the places, but the feeling of being there." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from an emotion I didn't understand back then. Something close to empathy, even though his story made no sense to me yet. He opened his eyes and looked at me as if weighing something. "You're the first person I've told even a piece of this to," he said. "You remind me of someone I knew, someone who listened." He didn't finish the thought, but I felt its weight. It was the first time I realized he wasn't just talking to me. He was reaching for something he'd lost. The next time I saw him, the weather had changed again. Newfoundland's skies were unpredictable that summer, clear one hour, heavy with fog the next. That evening, rain pressed softly against the windows, turning the harbor lights into wavering smudges of orange. The bar was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something. He sat in his usual seat, but his posture was different, straighter, more alert, as if something inside him had shifted and he wasn't trying to drown it anymore. When I walked in, he didn't look surprised. He nodded once, a small gesture that acknowledged the strange rhythm we'd fallen into. I took a seat beside him instead of going to my usual booth. He didn't comment on it, just slid his drink aside to make space. For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the soft hiss of rain and the occasional clink of glass from behind the counter. You ever think about how fast things change? He asked suddenly. I shrugged. I don't know. Doesn't feel fast to me. That's because you're growing into the world, he said gently. You're moving at the same pace as everything around you. You don't notice the shift. He paused. But when you go backwards, everything feels wrong. I looked at him carefully. Backwards. He sighed, the sound thin and tired. I remember things that haven't happened yet, he said. Things no one here could imagine. Roads without wires. Machines that fit in your hand and know everything. People talking across oceans in seconds. He shook his head as if scolding himself. I shouldn't be saying this. But you remember it? I asked. Too well. He tapped his temple lightly. Memory doesn't fade just because time does. I didn't know what to think. My mind tried to label him. Lonely, confused, maybe unwell. But every time I settled on an explanation, something in his eyes told me I was wrong. There was clarity there. A painful kind of clarity. You said last time that I reminded you of someone, I said softly. He hesitated. Someone I used to talk to, he said. Someone who listened without laughing. Someone from where I belong. His gaze drifted to the window, to the rain-soaked world outside. I miss them more than I can explain. Are they in the future? I asked, feeling foolish the moment the words left my mouth. He didn't correct me. He didn't laugh. He just nodded, slowly, painfully. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't understand the mechanics or the logic of what he was saying, but I understood the emotion. Homesickness, loneliness, a longing so deep it swallowed even his voice. Can't you go back? I whispered. His jaw tightened. I've tried, he said. You have no idea how many nights I've tried. The rain hammered a little harder then, as if echoing the desperation in his voice. But time, he whispered, doesn't always let go. He looked at me, eyes tired, scared, and heavy with truths I wouldn't understand for decades. And for the first time since I'd met him, I realized he wasn't telling a story. He was confessing a fate. The following week felt heavier than the ones before it. Even at 15, I could sense something shifting, like the quiet fabric of my routine had been pulled slightly out of shape. I'd go about my days as usual, school, chores, wandering by the harbor. But every evening, as the light thinned and the fog crept in from the water, my thoughts turned back to him. His words lingered like a draft that wouldn't leave the room. One evening, when the sky had settled into a soft gray and the air smelled of approaching rain, I found him outside instead of inside the bar. He stood near the wooden railing by the harbor, staring out over the darkening water. The boats rocked gently, ropes creaking in the wind. He didn't turn when he heard my footsteps, but I could tell he knew it was me. Didn't feel like going in today, he said quietly. I stood beside him, unsure of what to say. The tide washed against the rocks below us, slow and rhythmic. Some days, he continued, the world feels louder than others, even this place. His voice was rougher than usual, like he hadn't slept. What happened? I asked. He let out a humorless laugh. Nothing happened, that's the problem. He finally turned to look at me. You ever feel like you're waiting for something that won't come? I nodded, though my experience was nothing like his. Sometimes. He rested his arms on the railing. In my time, everything moves so fast you barely have a moment to think. You blink, and whole years feel different. New machines, new ways of talking, new everything. He gestured toward the quiet harbor. Here, everything holds still. It's peaceful, but it's like being trapped under ice. I watched him carefully. His words echoed with a strange mix of wonder and grief, like he was remembering a place he loved but couldn't return to. Do you miss it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting the cold wind pass over him. Every day, he whispered, and every night. I miss the lights, the movement, the noise, the people I knew. He swallowed hard, but I also miss things I didn't realize I'd miss until they were gone. I frowned. Like what? He opened his eyes, staring at me with a seriousness that made me feel older than I was. Choice, he said. The choice to go back, the choice to leave, the choice to stay. When you fall out of your own time, you lose all of them. The wind picked up, carrying a faint metallic smell from the docks. Cold, sharp. He shivered slightly but didn't move. Do you think you'll ever find a way home? I asked. He looked out over the water again. I used to think so, he murmured. Now, I'm not sure time works the way I believed it did. He stood there for a long moment, his silhouette framed by the dimming sky. And for the first time, I saw him not as a man out of place, but as someone quietly unraveling in front of a world that could never understand him. The next time I saw him, he looked different, like he'd spent hours wrestling with his thoughts and lost every round. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a trembling exhaustion in his hands that hadn't been there before. He sat inside the bar again, hunched forward, staring at a glass he hadn't touched. The bartender glanced toward him with a quiet concern but didn't say anything. Everyone in town knew how to mind their business gently. I approached slowly, unsure if he wanted company this time. Before I could choose a seat, he looked up. "Sit," he said softly. I did. For a long stretch of time, neither of us spoke. The bar felt smaller than usual, its dim bulbs casting sleepy pools of light across the wooden floor. Outside, a light rain tapped steadily on the windows. Finally, he whispered, "I had a moment today." I waited. "I woke up," he said, "and for a second, just a second, I didn't remember what year it was." He rubbed his temples. "I thought I was back. I thought I was home." The word home left his mouth like a wound reopening. "And then?" I asked. He let his hands fall to the table. Then I saw the calendar, 1968, Newfoundland, and it hit me all over again. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't raise his voice or tremble with intensity. The pain in his words was quiet, steady, like a bruise he'd learned to live with. "How did you end up here?" I asked gently. He exhaled, shaky. "I don't know. One night I went to sleep in my own time, my own world. Then I woke up in a place that felt unfinished." He glanced around the room, taking in the wooden walls, the stained ceiling, the outdated radio. Like the world was younger and I was the only one who remembered how it would grow. I felt a pang in my chest, something unexplainable, something between fear and sympathy. "Has anyone else ever believed you?" "No," he said simply. "You're the first person I've told this much to." He looked at me with an expression that felt unbearably vulnerable. "Because you listen, and because I think part of me needed someone from this time to hear me." I swallowed. "Why me?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Because you remind me of what it felt like to be young. Before everything sped up, before the noise, before the world grew too fast." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, as if resting from the weight of being displaced. "When I was your age," he murmured, "I never imagined time could be something you could fall out of, something that could let you slip through its fingers." He opened his eyes again, gaze fixed on mine. "But here I am." He didn't say it with pride or drama. He said it with the quiet truth of someone who had run out of ways to lie to himself. Over the next days, something in him began to unravel in small, careful pieces. Not loudly, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like an old thread loosening from a coat sleeve. He still came to the bar, still ordered the same drink, still stared at the same corners of the room, but his eyes had changed. They carried a kind of restless scanning, as if measuring the room against memories of a world that no longer matched. One evening, when I walked in, he didn't seem to notice me. His gaze was fixed on the small television mounted in the corner, one of those heavy boxes with fuzzy reception and a greenish tint. The news anchor was talking about some technological advancement in radio communications, something minor, something new for the time. But he watched it with a mixture of grief and frustration. When he finally looked away, he whispered, "They're so far behind." I sat beside him. "Behind what?" He shook his head slowly. "Everything. Behind everything I know." His fingers tapped the table with a nervous, impatient rhythm. "I used to complain that the world in my time moved too fast. Now I wish it would move just a little faster here, just enough for me to feel like I belong again." There was a long silence between us. The rain outside had thickened into a steady sheet, turning the windows into pale, shimmering walls. "Do you ever think you'll get used to it?" I asked. He let out a low, broken laugh. "You don't get used to losing your entire life overnight." His words hit me harder than anything he'd said before. Not because I fully understood them, I didn't, but because they sounded final. Like a truth he had tried to outrun and could no longer escape. "I used to have people," he murmured. "Friends I spoke to every day. Family I could reach in seconds. A job, a routine, a place where I made sense." He looked around the dim bar, the crooked frames, the dated furniture. "Here, I feel like a ghost of someone who hasn't lived yet. He rubbed his thumb across the condensation on his glass, drawing small circles that evaporated almost immediately. The strange thing is, he continued, I think the longer I stay here, the less I'll remember who I was. I looked at him closely. Do you want to remember? He hesitated, truly hesitated, as if the answer depended on which version of himself he wanted to keep alive. Yes, he said at last, but remembering hurts, and forgetting scares me even more. A chill moved through me, subtle but real. At 15, I didn't understand grief like his, not grief for something that hadn't happened yet, but I understood the way he spoke, like a man standing at the edge of two lives, unable to step fully into either. Before he left that night, he turned to me and said, If I disappear one day, don't assume I went home. I swallowed hard. What should I assume? He gave me a sad, tired smile. Assume time made its choice, just not mine. Then he walked out into the rain, the fog swallowing him almost instantly. The next time I saw him, the fog was so thick it looked like the whole town had been wrapped in cotton. Street lamps glowed as soft halos, barely pushing their light more than a few feet out. The harbor, usually alive with subtle movement and distant clatter, was silent. Even the gulls seemed to have disappeared into the gray. I walked to the bar with my collar pulled high, the air cold enough to sting. Something in the night felt wrong. Not dangerous, just heavy, like the world was bracing for a shift. When I stepped inside, he wasn't in his regular seat. My eyes scanned the room automatically, but the booth was empty, the drink unclaimed. For a moment, my chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. The bartender nodded toward the back, a quiet gesture that told me everything. He was here, just not where he usually sat. I found him sitting alone in a darker corner, where the light barely reached. He looked smaller that night, as if the fog outside had seeped into him and hollowed something out. I hesitated before approaching, not sure if he wanted company, but when he saw me, he managed a tired, grateful smile. You came, he said. I always do, I replied, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. He exhaled, long and slow, like the simple fact of my presence steadied him. Tonight feels different, he murmured, like the world's holding its breath. I slid into the seat across from him. You said something last time, about disappearing. He nodded, rubbing his palms together as if trying to warm them. Some nights I feel closer to where I came from. Not in a hopeful way, just different, like the line between then and now gets thinner. I frowned. What does that mean? It means, he said softly, I don't know how long I have. He looked up, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Time doesn't want me here, but it isn't letting me go either. The words hung between us like a draft no one could block. Did something happen today? I asked. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, sighing. I had flashes, little moments. I was walking past the mill, and for a second, I saw a skyline that shouldn't exist. Buildings taller than anything here, lights everywhere, and then it was gone, like my mind was split between two worlds. My skin prickled. Does that happen often? More lately, he admitted. It's getting harder to stay anchored, harder to pretend I belong. He leaned back, letting his head rest against the wall behind him. Do you know what the strange part is? When I first arrived, everything here felt wrong. Now it's the memories of home that feel distant. His voice trembled on that last word. He wasn't just losing his place in time. He was losing himself. We sat there for a long time, the dim light casting soft shadows across his face. He looked older than he had weeks ago, not because of age, but because of the quiet erosion of someone holding on to too many fading memories. Every now and then he'd close his eyes, as if trying to steady himself against the weight of whatever he felt slipping away. Do you ever think time can bend? He asked suddenly, opening his eyes. Not break, not stop, just bend. I wasn't sure how to answer. What do you mean? He gestured vaguely around the room. When I'm here, I feel like I'm standing in the middle of a slow-moving river. Everything takes its time, conversations, progress, even thoughts. His fingers drummed on the table. But in my time, it isn't like that. People rush, machines hum, lights blink. Everything is in motion, and His voice trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the window fogged from the warmth inside. I can still feel it sometimes, like a pulse I can't shake. You miss it, I said quietly. He nodded. I miss it so much it aches. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass as though listening. A distant horn, maybe from a boat, maybe from a truck, echoed strangely, its sound muted and stretched, as if traveling through more than just air. "What do you think brought you here?" I asked. He stared at the table, his hands tightening around each other. "I've wondered that every day." He took in a steadying breath. "At first I thought it was a dream, then a mistake. But now, I think it was something more complicated, something I can't explain." He looked up, meeting my gaze. "Maybe time isn't as straight as people believe. Maybe it has folds, fault lines, and maybe I just fell through one." His words made my stomach twist, not in fear, but in a kind of reverent wonder. "Do you want to go back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "More than anything." His voice cracked slightly. "But wanting isn't enough. If time wanted me gone, I'd be gone. If it wanted me home, I'd be home." He pressed a hand against his chest. "I feel stuck between breaths. Not here, not there." A silence settled between us, heavier than the ones before. "Sometimes," he continued, "I think the only reason I'm still holding on is because someone here sees me, listens to me." He gave a faint, fragile smile. "You make me feel like I'm not disappearing." His words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a warmth in my chest, something protective. I didn't fully understand what he was going through, but I knew he was sincere, and I knew he was afraid. "What if you don't disappear?" I asked, trying to sound hopeful. "What if things get clearer?" He shook his head gently. "This world wasn't built for me. Not this year. Not this pace. Every day I stay, I lose pieces." He placed a hand lightly against his temple. "And I'm running out of pieces." A few days passed before I saw him again. In a small town like ours, that absence felt louder than it should have. Each afternoon I'd walk by the bar, hoping to catch a glimpse of him through the window, hoping to see the familiar shape of his coat or the slope of his shoulders, but the booth stayed empty. The bartender, when I asked, just shook his head. "Haven't seen him? Strange fellow, that one." I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked home with a heaviness that didn't belong to someone my age. On the fourth day, I found him by the harbor again, leaning against the railing as if he'd grown out of it. The wind tugged at his clothes, his hair disheveled, his eyes fixed on the horizon. But he wasn't looking at anything, more like he was searching for something he kept missing. "You disappeared," I said quietly. He glanced at me, but it took him a moment to fully focus. "Did I?" he murmured. "Time's been strange. Stranger than usual?" He nodded. "Some moments feel too fast. Others feel too slow. Sometimes I blink and it's evening. Other times I swear hours pass in the space of a breath." He pressed a hand to his forehead. "I don't know what's real anymore." The confession chilled me more than the wind ever could. "Have you been sleeping?" I asked. "Not well," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see pieces of home. Not full memories, just flashes." He closed his eyes briefly as if trying to summon them. Lights, streets, faces, a world moving too quickly to hold. He opened them again, looking at me with a kind of fragile clarity. "And then I wake up here, where everything is still." He swallowed hard, his voice unsteady. "I'm afraid of forgetting the details. Afraid of waking up one day and not recognizing where I came from." Before I could respond, a gust of wind pushed in from the water, carrying the smell of salt and distant rain. He gripped the railing tighter, knuckles white. "Do you ever feel like something is pulling you?" he asked suddenly. "Like a current you can't see?" I hesitated. "Not like you mean. It's happening more." His voice dropped. "Moments where I feel lighter, like something is tugging at the edges of me, as if I'm being stretched between two places." I took a small step closer. "Is that dangerous?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But I think I'm running out of time. Whatever pulled me here, whatever crack I slipped through, it's shifting again." He looked at me then with an intensity that made my breath catch. "If I fade," he said quietly, "remember me. Not for what I said, but for what I tried to hold on to." And for the first time since I'd met him, I realized he wasn't only afraid of being trapped in the past. He was afraid of vanishing between both worlds, without belonging to either. The night everything changed began colder than any I remembered that summer. The air carried a sharpness that felt more like late autumn, and the sky held a strange, muted glow behind the clouds, as if light were leaking from somewhere it shouldn't. I walked toward the bar with a knot in my stomach, unsure whether I hoped to find him there or feared it. Each step felt heavier than the last, the fog swirling around my legs like low, wandering smoke. When I pushed open the door, the bar was nearly empty. Just the bartender wiping down glasses and a couple of old men quietly arguing over a card game. His usual seat was vacant. My eyes moved across the room, searching for him out of habit, until I noticed a shadowed figure sitting in the far corner, head bowed, shoulders hunched. Even from a distance, I knew it was him. I approached slowly, almost afraid to disrupt whatever fragile state he'd fallen into. When I sat across from him, he didn't lift his head right away. Only after a long moment did he look up, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before, a kind of quiet resolve mixed with grief. "You came," he whispered. "You look worse," I said before I could stop myself. He actually smiled at that, faint and tired. "I feel worse." The light nearest us flickered once, humming before steadying again. He glanced at it with a strange, startled expression, as if unsure whether he was imagining things. "I had another moment today," he said, stronger than any before. I leaned forward. "What happened?" He stared at his hands, as though the memory was too heavy to speak aloud. When he finally answered, his voice shook. I was walking past the post office, and suddenly everything around me slipped. He made a small motion with his fingers like tearing paper, just for a second. "But I saw something else." "Something else?" I repeated softly. "A street that doesn't exist yet, cars that haven't been built, and people, so many people, moving fast, talking fast, staring into little glowing screens." He swallowed. "It felt like home, just for a heartbeat." His thighs tensed beneath the table, his hands curling into fists. But then it was gone, like someone cut the power. A hush settled between us, broken only by the distant clack of cards. "I think," he said slowly, "that whatever brought me here is thinning, stretching, changing shape." My pulse quickened. "Is that good? Does it mean you can go back?" He shook his head. "It doesn't feel like going back. It feels like falling through something. Again." The way he said falling made my chest tighten. "Do you want me to stay with you?" I asked. He looked up, and for the first time since I'd met him, his eyes didn't look distant. They looked terrified. "Yes," he whispered. "Please." He wasn't asking as a man trapped in time. He was asking as someone afraid of disappearing alone. We stayed in that corner for a long time, neither of us speaking. Every few minutes, the lights above us flickered, soft, almost shy, like brief pulses of something trying to break through. He watched each one with the stillness of a man sensing tremors before an earthquake. The bartender didn't seem to notice. The old men kept playing cards, but something in the room felt altered, stretched thin, as if we were sitting on a seam in the world no one else could feel. Eventually, he exhaled shakily. "I don't think I have much longer." The words were so quiet I almost missed them. "What do you mean?" I asked. He pressed his fingertips against his temples. "All day today I've been slipping. Not fully. Just moments. Moments where I'm here, then not here. When I look at a street sign and it's wrong, or when I hear voices that don't belong." His hands trembled. "It's like my mind is trying to exist in two places at once." I swallowed hard. "But which one is real?" He gave a small, broken smile. "Both, and neither." He stared at the table, at the faint scratches etched into the wood. "The world I came from is real. This world is real, but I'm not meant to take up space in both." A faint hum filled the room then, like the low vibration of a far-off engine. I heard it. He heard it. No one else reacted. He looked around nervously. "There it is again." His voice wavered. "It's been happening for hours. It's like something is calling me." I leaned in, heart pounding. "Calling you back?" He shook his head. "No, not back. Forward." The word hung between us, heavier than anything he'd said before. Suddenly, he grabbed the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Do you feel that?" he whispered. I felt nothing at first, nothing but the familiar hum of the bar. But as I focused, a faint pressure pressed against my ears, like altitude shifting. The room itself seemed to grow softer at the edges. "I think time is opening," he said, "or closing. Maybe both." He looked at me then with a desperate urgency. "I don't want to disappear without telling someone the truth." "You can tell me," I said. My voice was barely steady. He nodded. "Then listen closely." He paused, breath trembling. "I didn't come here on purpose. I didn't come through a machine or a doorway. I went to sleep, in the year I belonged to, and I woke up in this one." His eyes filled with something close to fear. It felt like I'd been dragged through invisible ice, like something tore loose inside time and pulled me through with it. "Why you?" I asked, barely breathing. "I've asked myself that every day." His voice cracked. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe time stuttered. Maybe I slipped through a crack I wasn't meant to find. He closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down the side of his face. "But wherever I'm about to go, I don't think I'll get a second chance." The hum grew louder for a moment, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls, and he whispered, "Stay with me, please, just a little longer." We stayed there as the night deepened, the bar growing quieter until the only sounds left were the hum of the lights and the distant swell of the harbor. He was shaking now, subtly, like vibrations running through him. His eyes darted to the corners of the room, as if tracking things I couldn't see. Every so often his breath would catch, and he'd grip the table as if anchoring himself to this time, this moment. "I don't know how much longer I can hold on," he whispered. I nodded, even though I didn't understand the mechanics of what he meant. I understood the fear. That part was undeniable. He leaned closer. "If I disappear tonight, I don't want you to think I left on purpose." His voice trembled. "I won't be choosing it." "I know," I said. My hands were trembling too. The overhead lights flickered again, once, twice. A long electric pulse trembled through the bulbs, casting the room in a pale, wavering glow. Then everything steadied, but I could see the effect it had on him. He pressed a hand to his chest, wincing as if something inside him had jolted. "It's starting," he whispered. "What's starting?" He didn't answer. Or maybe he couldn't. He pushed himself to his feet slowly, gripping the edge of the table for support. His legs were unsteady, but there was a strange determination in his movements, as if he were following an instinct deeper than fear. "I need air," he said. I followed him out into the fog-soaked night. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to sting my lungs. A pale glow from the street lamps created halos in the mist, giving the world a soft, dreamlike quality. He stepped out into the empty street, breathing heavily, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Then he reached into his coat pocket. "I want you to have this," he said. He pulled out a small, torn scrap of paper. It looked worn, like he'd unfolded and refolded it countless times. He placed it in my hand with surprising gentleness. There was only one thing written on it: 2025. The moment my eyes scanned the number, the streetlight above us flickered violently, then steadied again. He exhaled as if relieved. "That year? Remember it," he said. "One day, you'll understand." "What happens in 2025? I asked. He smiled, a sad, resigned curve of his lips. "My life begins again there. Or ends. I don't know anymore." Before I could say another word, he staggered back, eyes widening. "It's pulling again," he whispered. His outline seemed to blur, not literally, not in a supernatural flash, but in the way a person looks when they're no longer fully present. His breathing quickened. His gaze darted over the street, frantic, searching for something solid to hold on to. And then, he stepped backward into the fog, just one step. But when I followed, there was nothing. No sound, no silhouette, no trace of movement. The street was empty, swallowed by gray. I called his name once, twice, but the fog devoured the sound. He was gone. Not walked away. Not run. Gone, as if the night itself had taken him. In my shaking hand, the paper with 2025 remained warm from his touch. I didn't sleep the night he vanished. I walked the length of that fog-covered street again and again, hoping to see even the faintest outline of him. But every corner, every alley, every doorway felt hollow in a way I'd never experienced before. Newfoundland was quiet on most nights, but that night, it felt emptied, as if something had been removed from the world, and the absence had shape. For days I kept the torn scrap of paper tucked safely in my pocket, smoothing its edges with my thumb until the crease softened. I didn't understand the meaning of 2025, not then. To me, it was nothing more than a number, strange, cryptic, belonging to someone who had lived too much in his own head. I told myself he'd simply left town, walked away, started a new life somewhere else. People did that sometimes, even in small places like ours. But deep down, even at 15, I knew better. As the years passed, I grew older, and the world changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. Technology, cities, the way people spoke, the way they moved, everything began to resemble the fragments he had mentioned in that dim bar. Little glowing screens, voices across oceans, a rhythm of life faster than anyone could hold. And I kept waiting, not for him, but for understanding. It arrived quietly, without drama. The morning the calendar flipped to 2025. Something in me shifted, something that had been dormant all my life. I remembered the fear in his eyes, the longing, the ache of a man torn out of his time. And suddenly, the number on that torn scrap no longer felt random. It felt like a destination, or a warning, or the year he was meant to return, one way or another. I don't know if he ever found his way home. I don't know if he lived out the rest of his days in a world that didn't fit him. I don't even know if time remembers people like him. But I remember. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the fog settles just right, I still look toward the harbor, half expecting to see him step out of it. Not older, not younger, just arriving from wherever he'd been all along. If you're enjoying the story so far and would like to hear more quiet, mysterious moments like this one, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot, and I'd be grateful to have you here as each new chapter unfolds.